Okay, I'm back in. I loved this episode. I absolutely adored it. It was Rebels Season 5, what I had been promised when this show, was coming. They were like, oh, it's secretly Rebels Season 5. So I watched most of Rebels Seasons 1 through 4, and I was like, this is the best Star Wars content I have ever seen. And then, it was like Rebels Light when it got started. And then the last episode was like all Clone Wars, and I didn't watch Clone Wars, so I wasn't feeling that. I think that's the disconnect I had from last week. But what I liked about this episode, wasn't just seeing Thrawn and Ezra jump to live action. We're going to talk about all of this. But it's that it made me feel that Star Wars is not only moving forward, a huge problem the brand has had, but evolving. And I love that. And I understand, I didn't watch Clone Wars, so I guess I'm not like 100% a Filoni fan, but I like Rebels, I like Mandalorian, I like where Star Wars is going. I like Bad Batch, and I realize that this is a small group because it requires so much homework to get into this. But as I've said before, it really is worth your time. I think Clone Wars is too big an ask, and we're moving forward now. But I mean, as evidenced by how little Anakin showed up, that was almost like in some ways a goodbye to that storyline, in my opinion. I sure hope so. But we're moving forward here, and you really should check out Rebels. As I've shared a cheat sheet, it's very doable, and they're short episodes that you can like. And also, some of them are story arcs, so you could, sometimes they're like a little movie, like an hour and a half, which makes for a great viewing experience if you watch the whole arc at once, because it's on Disney+. And as I said, it's the best Star Wars content I've ever seen. Although, when this show shines, Ahsoka, it is right up there with that. So last week's episode, as I said, was for Clone Wars fans. And so, because I didn't watch Clone Wars, while it was neat to see Hayden Christensen return, seeing Anakin didn't register with me emotionally the way seeing Ezra Bridger did. So on the one hand, I understand now how some of you felt last week, but it also made me think maybe some of you this week felt how I did last week because you're not familiar with Ezra Bridger, and I find that very interesting. Now, again, this is the problem when you divide and fracture your audience. Everybody is not on the same page. Now, Hayden Christensen, to his credit, certainly delivered his best performance to date. I thought he was very good last week. And even considering how slow Rosario Dawson is with her action sequences, still their lightsaber battles were, I think, some of the best we've seen in live action. Not as good as Rebels lightsaber fights. I hope that level of lightsaber action is coming. But that was cool. I mean, it was iconic. And speaking of iconic, the shot of Anakin blipping into Vader, venturing alone, forever changed, into the darkness was haunting. And along with the end of Rogue One, instantly became one of the iconic Darth Vader moments. So that was nice. But part of what annoyed me about Episode 5, I didn't like the second half, I didn't like the pacing, but even the good stuff in the first half, the return of Anakin was just so short-lived. They gave Hayden Christensen, he was so good, and he got very little to do. And sure, it helped Ahsoka to get over some stuff, and she got a cool makeover. I think she looks very good. I actually liked her look this week. We'll talk about that. But last week, there just wasn't enough story for me. The strokes, again, for me, were simply too broad. Now, Episode 6, with the absolutely enchanting title, Far, Far Away, which works on so many different levels. I love stuff like that. I'm like, wow! It's full of detail and story, and that gets me very excited. And again, it's looking forward. Episode 5, in my opinion, was adrift, looking backwards, while Episode 6 is focused, forging ahead for the Star Wars brand. But will both Thrawn and Ezra even make it back? As Thrawn kept threatening to leave people behind, he was like, the ship might not be here when you get back. And I was like, oh, are you jinxing yourself, Thrawn? I think you might get left behind. I just had that feeling that he and his army would be the ones left behind while everybody else said, oops, see ya, Thrawn, and went back to the galaxy. Because, I'll just say it here. While it's cool to see Thrawn, he didn't engage me the same way that seeing Ezra did. And I feel that while it's cool to revisit Thrawn and his Roman soldiers, how often does Thrawn think of the Roman Empire? Apparently, quite a bit. That's what happens when you leave these dudes alone. They're like, let's go full or partial Roman. But I felt like I don't really know if I see a future for them. And maybe that's why we never hear about Thrawn. Maybe that's the answer to the question I've been asking. We're like, why does no one talk about Thrawn if he's so instrumental to the future of, the First Order, which takes over for the Empire? I mean, Balen's skull is right about it being cyclical. I was like, you're in the Star Wars writer's room, are you? I mean, history is cyclical, but not to that degree. That's called lazy writing. But anyway, I thought, you know what? Maybe Thrawn doesn't return. Maybe, this is just, and that would be I think that would be a good ending for Thrawn, that we saw what happened to him, and we knew that, although he has an army of witches behind him, so you would think that maybe that would help him a little bit, but it hasn't helped him get off the planet since. But I guess someone could build another I don't know. I think leaving him there, I kind of feel that might be the way to go. What do you think? Would you leave Thrawn there, or would you bring him back? So apparently this planet in the new galaxy is a pergil graveyard, like an elephant graveyard. And traveling there via pergil is a one-way ticket. I guess that's why that pergil was willing to take the risk of helping Ahsoka and Huyang by swallowing their ship, because its days are numbered anyway. It's like, sure, why not? But this also makes sense because this explains why Thrawn and or Ezra never came back via pergil. They had a ship. That thing has also escape pod, so Ezra could have jumped into an escape pod from the destroyer and gotten in a pergil and said, I'd like to go back, please. But they didn't. So apparently, as I said, this is a one-way trip. But that means Ahsoka is currently on a one-way trip, and she cannot come back by pergil either. So the only way back is the hyperdrive. Traveling by hyperdrive with all the colors, for some reason reminded me of a theme park ride, where they're like, oh, we're going very fast, or into the future or something, and you're like, cool. Like, I don't believe it at all, but it's very cozy, because again, it reminds me of a theme park. I'm like, oh, are we going to do hyperdrive in the parks, and this is how it's going to look? Also, it reminded me of the Marvel special presentation intro. But coming out of hyperdrive was just as cool as when they did the jump into hyperdrive in episode 4. Love that. I would just park myself on the hyperdrive, not even on the destroyer, because I'm worried that's going to get left behind. But I would not leave that hyperdrive until it was time to go, because they said otherwise they're going to be stuck here forever in a world with no technology, back in caveman days apparently. And I think the tension that's being created of our characters potentially being left behind forever, but they're forced to go out and leave the safety of the hyperdrive because they're searching for something that means everything to them. So they have to race against the clock. And that's a great idea. That's good writing. I love that. And as soon as Ahsoka and Huyang arrive, they're going to have the same problem. So my question is, do our heroes stow away on Thrawn's Star Destroyer? When it first appeared, by the way, I was like, that's it! That's the missing ship from the end of Rebels! We found it! Because, the show, I think to its credit, did make me feel like I was searching for Ezra and Thrawn too. And I was like, we found it! It was distressed from the end of Rebels when the pergil wrapped its tentacles around it. And I was like, that is so cool. Or they could steal the hyperdrive itself before it's even attached to the destroyer, as I said, leaving Thrawn, and maybe Morgan too, stranded. By the way, is Morgan Employee of the Month or what? I was like, wow, this is incredible loyalty. In fact, it's fascinating that both Thrawn and Ezra are being saved, potentially, by women hell-bent on finding them. Wow! That's gotta mean something. Also, at the beginning of the episode, I was struck by how Morgan's ship feels so different from for Star Wars. It's more metropolis. It's got gold coloring. It's circles instead of, very clean cut lines. That's very different because, it's a different aesthetic for Star Wars because usually they go with Empire chic. That's what they've always gone with. But that begs the question, does this new look feel like Star Wars? I'm torn on it. It kind of does. I think it helps that they've got a lot of Jedi walking around it all the time, and droids. But also, on that note, does this new galaxy feel like Star Wars? Everybody was wondering what the new galaxy would look like. And the answer is Game of Thrones! And I have mixed feelings on that. I think it's sort of beneath Star Wars to borrow so heavily from another franchise. But at the same time, I find it very interesting, and I'll tell you why. I recently interviewed Gareth Edwards about his new movie, The Creator, and he talked a little about Star Wars. I was asking about his franchise work in the past, because of course, he at least got Rogue One off the ground, even though he wasn't allowed to complete it. And he theorized that Star Wars was a combination of the distant future, but also the distant past. And this galaxy, this new to us galaxy, represents, like, in its purest form, the past, the distant past of Star Wars, because it was cut off and it didn't have the technological advancements of our main galaxy. They never really explained why it was cut off. I mean, I guess you can see there don't seem to be, the witches seem like a pretty big resource to me. I mean, Thrawn certainly seems to think so, but there didn't seem to be anything to motivate people to go back and reconnect with this galaxy until now. I guess Thrawn and Ezra can feel real good about that. They're like, yep, we're valuable commodities. But anyway, so as I said, this is in some ways pure Star Wars. Star Wars in they're arguing its original form. But, I mean, that would be retconning what the original form of Star Wars is. And do people want to see that? I mean, it's a big swing. And if Filoni can pull it off, I think it would open up a lot of new sections for Star Wars storytelling. And my goodness, we need new Star Wars stories. But at the same time, I think that George Lucas went more with very clear-cut, simple fantasy stories, whereas Dave Filoni's more intellectual approach really wins over fans, myself included, but it limits the appeal. Almost like we talked about with like Westworld, as that folded more into itself and became more intellectual, it lost a lot of its audience. And I don't know how commercial these choices are, but I find them fascinating. And Star Wars, though, also, it's, speaking of problems that the brand has moving forward, is that it's still cannibalizing itself. Like, the Witches of Dorthamir are a great, fresh addition to the live-action universe. They seem very cool. They seem like this past of Star Wars, but they still have a Star Wars element to them. So they feel good to me. They feel like Star Wars. Not like they're shoehorning something else in there. But these snails, I mean, come on, they're Ewoks, right? But just far less cute. I also felt the VFX this episode really stood out, and I didn't believe that any of these creatures were actually there. I was like, that's a visual effect, thank you very much. Including the dog horse wolves, which always seemed to have like this overly sharp quality to them that made them not fit with the rest of the picture. I kept thinking they were going to attack, by the way. I was like, how's that thing not bitten anything yet? Like, whoa. Bordizzo, to her credit, I think this was the best we've seen Bordizzo, I feel, this episode. She did an excellent job acting with all of the visual effects creatures. And she did the most to sell them. I thought she was great. By the way, when we first got to the planet, and whoever designed the giant screaming statues is a genius. I loved those. But when I saw the silhouetted wolves, I thought Ezra could do well here. Because, of course, in Rebels, he was an animal whisperer. So I was surprised to see him instead living such a stoic, peaceful, passive life. I thought he was being a rascal, still a rebel, creating problems for Thrawn, but I guess he feels Thrawn isn't a threat anymore, because they're both just stuck there forever, so he decided to live his best snail life instead. Also, I must say, because of the way Omni-Man went off into the alien cultures and basically started families, I was wondering I don't know if 5 years would be enough to find a snail attractive, but what do you think would be the breaking point? But anyway, he's like, thank goodness you showed up, Sabine. I was this close to making out with a snail. All right, so, hey man, it's Invincible's fault for putting the idea there. He's like not, he didn't see, like, so I was surprised that he wasn't like working with the wildlife of the planet and still doing very Ezra type things. But also, to be fair, he didn't have his lightsaber, right? Sabine has it, and thank goodness she brought it with her. Has she really just been a lightsaber delivery service this whole time? But I'm thinking, it's like, what's that service called? Darn it, I forgot the name. TaskRabbit. He's like, this is an incredible TaskRabbit. That's what he did to Sabine. He TaskRabbited her. But anyway, I'm thinking he might be a little rusty with his Jedi skills. It's been a while, and I don't think he's been practicing. Although maybe his time here has made him even more like a Jedi, because he does seem to have taken on that monk quality that Ahsoka speaks so highly of. She's like, you gotta have a little monk in you, or it's just not gonna work. Although I think Ezra was doing pretty darn good at the end of Rebels in terms of his Jedi abilities. So that's why I don't want him to become too much like Ahsoka, because as I've said before, Ezra and Kanan's Jedi fight sequences in Rebels, those are the best that I've ever seen anywhere. They're incredible, and I would love to see them this season replicated in live action. I'm hoping next week, quite frankly. I mean, as Balen points out in this very episode, Ezra is a new breed of Jedi, trained in the wild, less knight, more rebel. And if you watched Winning Time or are a Lakers fan, I would say Ezra and Kanan's style of Jedi are like the 1980s Lakers in comparison to all the other basketball players at the time. They're looser, bolder, and have a whole lot of flourish. Oh, it's so great to see them work. So what is Balen up to, by the way? He seems to want to create a new order that's not Jedi at all, but that is above Jedi and Sith. So like he says he's training Shin Hati to be something more than a Jedi. But I'm like, she seems like a pretty stereotypical Sith apprentice to me, man. I've not seen Shin Hati do anything where I'm like, oh, where'd you learn to do that? But what could Balen be looking for? I mean, the suspense is killing me, Balen. Just spit it out. And why isn't he looking for it either? I thought that was weird. Like, shouldn't he have used Thrawn's order to look for Sabine and Ezra as an excuse to just go do his own thing? He was like, no, first I think we will look for Sabine and Ezra. Maybe Ezra's part of it. That's intriguing. But Ray Stevenson, now that he's finally been able to contribute to this show, has been a fantastic addition. But of course, he tragically passed away right before the show began in real life. So it's sad that he won't be able to see through whatever Balen has planned, because it seems pretty interesting. I think that he too is shaping the future of Star Wars. It's like, let's get a third political party in here, man. Not Jedi, not Sith. Now, some of you complained about the pacing of this episode. I thought the pacing of the last episode was horrible. And this one, it did get a little slow, I agree. But I think creatively, once the episode was over, I realized that was to create the feeling in us that Sabine was having within the episode that she just wasn't going to find Ezra after all. In fact, when she got to that snail camp and she looked around, you could see her finally like exhaling and letting go and just realizing that maybe she wasn't going to find Ezra. You know, she'd been like on the edge this whole time, being like, he's so close. And when she was in that camp, you saw her like let go of that hope. But then there he was! That was just, they handled that so beautifully that I can't get upset about the pacing beforehand because it created that moment. That was incredible to me. And Dave Filoni nailed the Ezra casting. I wasn't sure about Eman Esfandi in hollow form, and thank goodness he got a new outfit because they didn't do a good job adapting Ezra's look to live action. But here, he looks phenomenal. So standing there with shades of not only his father, but I think to some degree Kanan, was a beautiful thing to see. He was not only the Ezra I remembered, and some of you commented how great it was that he kept his positivity. And I agree. I think that was a great aspect of his reveal. But he was also something more. He'd grown up. I think that helped sell him in live action. Because when we saw him before, he was still a kid. And now he's an adult. And so I think that helps us make the leap. Because he doesn't have to look exactly like the Ezra that we remember, because he's not. And I was very happy and moved that a character that I've come to love so much is living his best life and thriving, even under difficult circumstances. These days, Hollywood likes to tear characters down. Look what they've done to so many characters recently. So again, this positivity is very uplifting and exciting. Star Wars also is desperately in need of male Jedi to balance things out. I'm enjoying the female Jedi very much, but I'm thinking that for the sake of the franchise and having broad appeal, they need to get some guys in here. I mean, look how great it is that Balen's finally been activated on the season. So Ezra and Jason are extremely promising. I want to see them in the Filoni movie. I want to see them in the Rey movie. This is great stuff. Could Ezra, by the way, train Jason, as Kanan, Jason's father, trained him? That would be beautiful! Although I don't know if I want to saddle, part of me doesn't know if I want to saddle Ezra with that storyline, but Jason is about the age that Ezra was at the beginning of Rebels. So, I mean, I don't know. I kind of like Jason in episode 4, so let's maybe go for it. And he was okay in 5 too. All right, so anyway, thankfully Sabine was having a fantastic hair and makeup day when she found Ezra. I was like, you look good, girl. I'm excited for you. But one of you tweeted me that you felt that Ezra put her in the friend zone, and you felt like she'd come all this way and she got friend zoned. And it's funny, as storytelling evolves, I think, because it happens in real life, I thought it was really interesting to hear of a woman talk about a woman being in the friend zone. And I liked that. I thought that was funny. But I don't think that's what's happening to Sabine. I think at that moment, they're both just so relieved that it's all over, because they've just both been waiting for so long to find Ezra and for Ezra to be found. So I think that, and also, by the way, Sabine is very distracted and has a lot on her mind by all the bad news that she has to tell Ezra very, very soon. So I think that since they never even flirted in Rebels, like this relationship never really got off the ground. It was just really and always in its very early stages. So I think it's both. I think it's there. I feel the spark, but I think they're both going to wait to test the waters until they get out of this mess, which is good. They're both such grounded people, because this is not a good time to try and see if there's a romantic spark there. And by the way, I think they make a fantastic couple. I was like, yes, this is a great couple for Star Wars moving forward. Although I don't really know if Sabine needs to be a full Jedi. I don't think they need to be a Jedi couple. She continues to show pretty much no ability, and now Ezra needs his lightsaber back. Thank you very much, and he better take it back. If he's like, I don't want to take it away from you, Sabine, I think the whole audience will be like, take it. Anyway, I did like Sabine's fight this episode. She did her Mandalorian heritage proud, but at the same time, she wasn't a Mary Sue either. It was a tough fight. It was really, this was her best episode. She was fantastic. And again, I think it's very telling that she used the lightsaber only as a last resort. I don't even think she wants to be a Jedi. I think the whole reason she even pursued that was to be closer to Ezra. And then I think the reason she came back to Ahsoka was to find Ezra. And that's why Huyang says that for Sabine, the only path forward has ever been find Ezra. And that has influenced every single decision she's made since they separated. Even including her Jedi training. The witches sensed it on her, I guess. But I mean, she can just have some ability with the Force, that's fine. But I'd rather have a Jedi Mandalorian couple, quite frankly. Mandalorians are getting a lot of press. They must have gotten a new PR agent. They're like, we're everywhere, it's great. All right, Thrawn. It was very cool to use the same actor who voiced the character on Rebels, because in some ways, he therefore felt exactly the same. You're like, oh my gosh, it's Thrawn. But in appearance, not so much. First off, Thrawn's got a little bit of a Tums. That really struck me when we saw him, when he emerged. Maybe he's carbo loading out of depression. But what is there to eat on that planet? But Thrawn is such a perfectionist, I couldn't see him letting that happen to himself. I thought it was funny. One of you sent me this funny meme about it, which I thought was hilarious. Here, on this episode, Thrawn's biggest asset is that he's merely competent. Although don't underestimate that, because that's highly unusual for anyone usually associated with the Empire. In live action, the white uniform looks surprisingly cheap to me. I think because it's not very well tailored. He had like a white sheet on that was just belted. I was like, there are no tailors here either? Who's wrapping these red ropes around the stormtrooper so artistically? There's someone here. And he didn't even really seem painted blue to me, or like he was wearing red contacts, which I know can be difficult. Although Rosario Dawson, I believe, is truly wearing contacts to transform her eyes. And I feel she's painted. I think hers looks organic. Whereas with Thrawn, I felt like someone went in post and like used Photoshop on each frame to just like paint him in. That's how it looked to me. And that wig, awful. I also wish they'd made the bumps on his forehead more pronounced so he seemed more alien. He just seemed like they were like, ooh, this guy's alien because he's blue. And I was like, come on, man. What do you think of Thrawn's soldiers? I'm torn. Very Game of Thrones, very ancient Rome, as we joked. And while it's super cool and creepy that this one battalion leader gets a special mask, I was like, wow, he really DIY'd it over here. But isn't the whole point of the stormtrooper uniform to rob them of their identity and make them part of the system? So I'm not really quite sure what's going on here. And where did they get all this gold? Where did all the gold come from? The best thing about this guy, though, is that we all thought that maybe for a moment he was Ezra Bridger, like who Thrawn maybe had turned, or maybe the witches had, Temple of Doom style. Like when Sabine was like, show me Ezra, and that that guy stepped forward, and I was like, is he going to take off his mask and it's Ezra? That was a great misdirect. And thankfully, they didn't hold it for too long, because we got to see Ezra at the end of this episode. So as you can see, episode 6 focuses on new characters and new elements as Star Wars moves into the future, and that's why I like it so much. Although finally, I do want to touch on Ahsoka and Huyang, their opening scene, which I thought was really nice. She does look much better in white. It highlights her eyes and markings, and she just also seems lighter emotionally. I think a lot of us have not been super jazzed about Rosario Dawson's performance here. Not to the point, I still think she's well cast, but I think we've all been kind of like, it's not Ahsoka. Now she's starting to seem a little bit more like Ahsoka. Whatever. If episode 5 did that, great. I loved talking about stories, as Star Wars itself is a story. Everything eventually becomes a story. That's what history is, right? But the coziness of also talking about bedtime stories. With Huyang, who still has all of the stories in his databank, telling Ahsoka a story that he did when she was a child in training. I thought that was beautiful. And David Tennant is such a wonderful choice to voice Huyang, because when he began to say the Star Wars famous opening crawl, it was magical. And they had the light coming toward them. And then they went to the title, Far, Far Away. You were like, mwah, beautiful. So that's my breakdown of episode 6. Who do you think is getting out of this galaxy? Were you moved by these developments or left scratching your head? And what do you think of live action Thrawn and Ezra, if you knew them from Rebels or if you're just meeting them for the first time? As I said, while Thrawn is definitely cool to see again, to me, Ezra is the one who has tremendous potential. And I feel like he's going to come back, but maybe Thrawn isn't. And what's that cargo that they're loading on the Star Destroyer? It looks like coffins to me. Is that like maybe dead witches? Or the storm? They said they lost a lot of their numbers. Did they save their bodies and the witches? Is it going to either be an army of witches or dead corpses like shadow monsters? Like what Marek, right? Reanimated by the witches? We can take that cargo back. Even if we don't take Thrawn back. Maybe Thrawn will come back if they do that. Or maybe they'll be forced to animate them early. But that's cool stuff. I love that stuff. So that's my thoughts. What do you think? What did you think of episode 6? Share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.